Hello guys and welcome back to the channel. Whenever I hear Crofty talk about F1, he usually says something along the lines of, in Formula 1, we have the best drivers in the world. But that got me thinking, does F1 have the best drivers in the world? No, but it's a bit more complex than that. Obviously, I'm not suggesting that you could just pick a guy from the street and he's able to beat Max Verstappen. That's ridiculous. I'm referring to when these drivers are younger and you can nurture that talent. Is it the best guys that their talent gets nurtured? And you might say, whoa, but these guys have won their junior karting championships, their car championships. A lot of them are GP2 or F2 champions and have earned their place in F1. But that's also not what I'm talking about. I'm not talking about who is there, I'm talking about who isn't there. F1 has a massive barrier to entry problem. I'm not sure if you've noticed, but most F1 drivers are rich. And I'm not talking about from their contracts with their teams, I'm talking about from their parents. Most of these guys come from wealth. They were rich whether F1 worked out or not. This creates a huge barrier to entry as opposed to a sport like boxing, because not many people can enter the sport of karting or cars to try and become a Formula 1 driver because they simply can't afford it. And if you think about a sport like boxing, in which the best boxers are in fact poor, a lot of people think it's because of the toughness that comes from the fighters. And I don't dispute that it is toughness that comes from being poor, but a lot of it is the fact that there are more poor people in the world than rich people. And so if you allow everyone to compete in a sport, you're more likely to find a poor person is better at it than a richer person, simply because there are more poor people to choose from, if that makes any more sense. And not only is karting expensive, it can take millions to go from cars all the way to F2 or even F1. And so the pool is small. And for those of you who don't know what I'm talking about when I say pool, the pool of people is essentially the amount of people competing for a job. As an example, I live in the UK. So imagine I was to say that the best mathematician from the UK is someone from my school, but I only tested people from my school. Would you say that, yes, of course, this is the best mathematician in the world? You would say, no, you have to test a lot more people in the country. You have to test all of these different universities. Now, if I told you, if we tested every single university or everyone had a chance to take the test, and then we found the person with the highest math score, you would say, okay, this is a lot more accurate. And that's the same thinking that is behind this. F1 drivers, it's really hard to say that they're the best in the world when most people don't even have a chance at this. I wasn't an F1 fan for most of my life, but even if I was, it wouldn't have mattered. I wouldn't have been able to truly engage with the sport by playing it, because I'm not rich enough. I don't have the money for it. My parents didn't have the money for it. And speaking of parents and money, I think this is a great segue into the next biggest problem: pay drivers. Even amongst the people that make it to Formula 1, some of them don't get in due to financial situations. Latifi making it in before Piastri, for example, or other drivers making it in, and you think drivers like Nick De Vries that might not have made it. I know Nick De Vries is still stacked, but they might not have made it in sooner when they probably could have performed better than they have done. And some drivers have to wait a few years, whilst other drivers don't even win Formula 2 and still get a seat. I mean, could you imagine if something like this happened in the NBA? If NBA spots weren't picked purely on talent in their college, it was picked on who could bring in the most money to each team. Everyone would say this is the most corrupt way to choose who gets these lucrative contracts, who gets to play in the league. And to be fair, a lot of F1 fans would agree that we don't like pay drivers for this very reason. It stops really talented drivers from getting in the sport, and overall it's not a good look for the sport that you can essentially buy your way in. And yet this continues. I think the biggest offender is probably Lance Stroll. Lance Stroll right now, in my honest opinion, is an okay driver. But let's be honest, the only reason he's okay now is because he's been able to buy experience. He would have been sacked years and years ago if he wasn't a pay driver. If he didn't have the backing of his dad, he would have been axed from the team because of performances, but no, he got to stay. And speaking of talent as opposed to wealth, when you do look at F1 and you look at the richest drivers and you even look at the poorest drivers, you notice a trend. Drivers like Esteban Ocon, Sebastian Vettel, and Lewis Hamilton, drivers who didn't necessarily come up with money, they're amazing drivers. I think it's so funny that the one black guy to ever come into the sport of F1 absolutely obliterates everyone else. And not only that, he is one of the poorest to ever come into F1. Doesn't that make everyone think, maybe there are more Lewis Hamiltons out there? Maybe we don't have the best drivers and we just simply have the richest ones that want to compete. Esteban is such a polarizing driver, never wanting to be beat. And Sebastian Vettel, an aggressive winner by any means possible. If you look back to his prime, he was simply ruthless. You could tell that they grew up with not much and it was everything to win in F1 to them. I just make this note that it's a fair conclusion to make that since we know that some pay drivers are in the sport and they simply suck, let's keep it a buck, they suck. And you have other drivers in this sport that are doing really well and that grew up poor, maybe we don't have the best F1 drivers in the world. Maybe F1 needs to do a much better job at making the sport more accessible, because until we do that, I just can't confidently say that these drivers are the best in the world. But turning this back to me for a second, when I was younger, I wasn't really into F1. I didn't really know anything about F1 when I was, in that vital age to start going into the sport. And when I grew up, nobody really knew about F1. So F1 was seen as this place where old rich white men just go and race around a circuit and spend lots and lots of money that I simply don't have. My point being is that the popularity of F1 plays a vital role in the people that join it. Football, I can confidently say, has the best drivers in the world because it's so popular. Everyone is playing football. But Formula One, especially before the Liberty Media takeover back in 2017, it didn't have the popularity it has today. A lot of new fans will come into the sport and think, oh, like F1's always been this way, I just didn't know about it. F1 has not been this way. For a very long time, F1 was a very, very niche sport, a very popular sport, a top sport, but a niche sport in which if you weren't part of a circle, F1 was just never really mentioned. And it makes sense. How can kids and parents engage with a sport they simply can't afford? They simply can't really look at, they can't really get into it. At best, I mean, even me as an F1 fan, all I've been able to do is look at F1 in front of a screen. I've seen an F1 car in real life, but I've barely been able to even get close to that as well. So I do think things like Drive to Survive are really good in the sense that they do help the sport. They help it grow, they help it reach new audiences, and new audiences are great, not just so we can get more viewers to watch the races, but so that we can get more kids to come in and go into karting and go into cars and challenge and increase this pool so we are confident that we have the most amount of people competing and so we get the best drivers possible. Now, the sport is spreading quicker than it ever has done before. I think ever since the 2021 season, the sport has essentially become mainstream. Drive to Survive is a massive contributor to that. And the fact that Formula One has tried so hard, probably too hard, to break into the American market has shown their commitment to opening up the sport to everyone. But I think we would still need to wait a few more years before F1 is truly a sport in which anyone can access, because as of right now, unless you're actually rich or you're a female minority, let's say you're a female black woman, it's going to be hard to find F1 sponsorships that really just tape to you. I mean, unless your name is Lewis Hamilton Jr., which you might actually find a McLaren sponsorship waiting for you. But overall, I still believe that top drivers like Senna, drivers like Schumacher, drivers like Max Verstappen, drivers like Lewis Hamilton would still be at the top no matter what. I think those drivers are symbolically representing exactly what it means to be an F1 driver. They are the fastest, they know so much things, they are so multifaceted in this sport. But it's the other drivers, it's the other 18, 17, 16, 15 drivers, in which you've got to wonder that if there was someone who was given the opportunity from a young age, would they be able to compete with them, and would they be able to take their seat, if not for money and if not for lack of knowing of the sport? And at the end of the day, we all want to see the pack come together. Thank you for watching this video. I'm going to be uploading a lot more recently as the season is starting. Make sure to like, subscribe, and peace.